We're in Sefer Avodah. I'm sorry for this thing making noise. We're in Hilchos Isurim Mizbeach in the 4th parak, I think. Let me get exactly there. Oh, okay. No, the end of the 3rd parak over here. The last halacha talks about buying animals from the Gentiles. Why? Someone might say, oh, maybe it was used for idolatry in some respect. Or maybe even worse, a Gentile sodomized his animal, right? By the way, it was assumed Jewish people didn't do such a thing, but it's not unheard of. If the Torah says don't do such a thing, says don't do these things with animals. Can't even say it. But apparently there are people out there who are that crazy. Okay. I do not consider, by the way, homosexuals crazy. If the Torah says don't do it, it's because perfectly sane and rational people would have the urge to do it. They're just told, please don't do it. Just like all the other forbidden relations. Okay. Doesn't mean it doesn't say anything about them, negatively. It's okay to have Yetzer Haras. It's not okay to act on your Yetzer Haras. And a person who says, okay, I did something wrong and I continue to do something wrong, so we disapprove. We say, no, you're not allowed to do that. And we will not accept what you're doing. It says here, so, oh yeah, I didn't share it. We acquire or we accept, in this case. What is luchim? In this case would mean even purchase, because often likuchin is making a transfer. If they were just trying to donate, we already knew that Gentiles can offer sacrifice in the temple. It says mikablim. In this case, the gizbar, the people in charge of acquiring animals for the temple service on behalf of the people, they have to go take temple money and purchase animals. So in this case, it's talking about purchasing. We could buy all the korbanot from the Gentiles. And we do not worry or say, how can we buy from them? How do we know that these animals are with these animals? The male did something to a person. And nirba means whether male or female, a human male did something, penetrative. Hold on one second, I'm losing internet. Hold on. We don't have to worry that perhaps these animals are muktzeh or navad. In the next chapter, we're going to see what's the difference between muktzeh and navad. Muktzeh means set aside for idolatrous purposes, and navad means it was actually worshipped as an idol, a living animal actually worshipped. Okay. The only time we wouldn't buy such an animal is if we know for certain that it's already been disqualified, that they actually did something to this animal. Sometimes there was a marking on the animal. The priests marked the animal as property of this, this cult or whatever it is, or it has a sign that it had been designated for sacrifice, or something else. They talk about in the Maseches Avodah Zarah buying skins from the Gentiles. They skinned an animal. The temple also had a whole every animal that came into the temple, its skin was eventually used for something. It eventually became chulin. It was property of the Kohanim. So they talked about orot levuvim. What's orot levuvim? It means that they used to have this type of worship, popularized by the Indiana Jones movie, where the act of sacrifice was they rip out the creature's heart. They make a hole and just pull out the heart while it's still alive. That's the first thing they do. So that's pretty horrible, but it's mentioned in the Talmud. So that's you could tell that an animal had this terrible thing done to it because of the unique incision that's still showing in the whole skin. If they slaughtered the animal properly, you'd see there's a main cut at the neck. But if they did this, rip out the heart literally, so it would show. So a siman like that, okay, something indicating that it had been worshipped. This pasuk is describing Saul's. Well, it's a quote. Saul was explaining to Samuel where the animals came from. Saul had been commanded by Samuel in the name of God, go smite the Amalekites, destroy everything. Men, women, and child, and even all their beast, all the animals, destroy everything they have. By the way, Milchemes Amalek, even today, is such a commandment that, let's say there was an Amalekite national body, still identified as Amalekites, and they were starting up fights with the Jews. So we'd have to basically kill all of them, including all their animals. No, that was a one-time deal. That was a special commandment given to Samuel to give to Saul. Why? Because later in the book, we see that David did take spoil from the Amalekites. He spared no soul, but he took of their booty. So it says here that Saul said, yeah, I wanted to give sacrifice to God. And by the way, had Samuel not been given this specific commandment at the time, no, even destroy all the animals, don't take their animals for sacrifice. It would have been perfectly fine to take these Amalekite animals and assume that they're still all kosher for sacrifice. You don't have to worry that the Amalekites, the worst of the worst, had done anything sexual to these animals or with these animals, or that they had worshipped them or set them aside for idol worship. You don't have to worry about that. A better pasuk would have been, therefore, to just bring that shows that King David did it, but there's no pasuk that that sums it all up like this pasuk does. It's taken from the same book, but it sums it up. And like I like to say, this should be reiterated. Basically, men like Saul, if they had been judged by standards of anybody not themselves. Remember, Saul was held to a higher standard than David, then he would have done nothing wrong. David did something similar. It's considered that he did a good thing. And the prophet Samuel had nothing wrong with what Saul did until God told him, no, Saul violated my commandment, and it upset Samuel. Like, what? How could that be? He did exactly as you told. No. Little hair. Okay. Saul was given a higher standard, and he was given the highest standard to uphold, and he couldn't. But for most of us mortals, we wouldn't have seen a problem. Where else do we see examples of this? Let's say Nadav and Avihu. Once again, we described also their justification. Had been anybody else in their situation, it would have been totally rational and even said, isn't that what God commanded? After like slight misunderstanding. But only appears for us like that. Same thing happened eventually, by the way. It was Moses who told Aaron, oh, that's what God meant. I finally understood the prophecy. I myself didn't understand Pshat, Vayidom Aaron, but then the same thing happened to Aaron and Moses themselves. They were also held to a really high standard and were left scratching their heads. What exactly did they do wrong? And that's why there's no consensus. What did they do wrong to deserve what they did wrong? As a matter of fact, Moses himself even says, apparently, there's one shot in Devarim, Moses says, really did nothing wrong. It was because of the people that Moshe Rabbeinu himself was punished. Okay, it was your fault, and God just delayed the punishment. He needed an excuse, so to speak. Who else was held to such a high standard? We could find other examples. The point is that this is the case brought. We learn from the implication that had Saul not been told to destroy the Amalekites' animals, of course they could have been used for sacrifice. Now let's go into the fourth parak. Basically, this parak is going to talk about the details of Rovea, Nirba, Muktzah, Nevad, and we're going to also introduce the Esnan, Kelev, and Mechir Zona. And one of the shots we're going to find there is Esnan Zona, also the pshat. Very interesting that it's not what you think it is. Okay. But it is mikra midei pshuto, but it's not exactly on the surface. Tosfos's understanding is a lot more pshat than, let's say, the Rambam's. We'll see that in a second. Whether it was an animal, behema, domesticated animal, because no such thing as a chaya. Chaya is non-domesticated animal. We call wild animals. There can't be korban. They can be kosher, but they're not a korban. And the oaf, those are birds to nirba. Nirba means a man did something to them, penetrative. Oh, shehemith et hadam, or they killed a person. Somehow yet, I don't know how it could be. I can understand how larger birds can bring about a person's death, but I don't think a pigeon could even kill a baby. Okay? B'nai Yonah, Tor and B'nai Yonah. Tor is a pigeon, B'nai Yonah are young turtle doves. I don't see how that could happen, but Lu Yitzuyar could happen. If you could somehow conceive of a situation where such an animal brought about a person's death, O Huktzeh, or it was set aside for idolatrous purposes, O Nevad, worshipped, Hakol Pasul Agabe Amizbeach. They're all disqualified, can't be offered as sacrifice. Ha-Rovea v'Nirba v'Shemithith Adam. These three categories, the Rovea means the animal was the active one, the male animal is active. The Nirba is one that had something done to it, that's why it's in a nifal. And the one that killed the person, Ima Yusham Shnei Edim, there were two witnesses to the act. Not only that, they're actually supposed to be stoned, they're supposed to be destroyed. Isser Hana. Uv Saran Asur Banaya, and their flesh cannot be eaten. You have a shore that killed a person with witnesses, so it's a total loss for the owner. You can't even get the carcass or skin it or anything like that. It has to be destroyed. The animal's killed, destroyed, owner loses out everything. Vein Sarch Lumar Ba'elu. So it shouldn't. Of course, these have to be said. This you don't have to even say it. Shehein asrin lagavoa. They can't be sacrificed. If these animals minastam had nothing to do with temple times, or nothing to do with temple offerings, so you'd have to stone them, destroy them. So too, of course, you can't bring them as sacrifice. Yeah, the owner can't say, "Well, my shore hamuad had just killed another person, so now I have to destroy this shore. So what am I going to do? I'm going to dedicate it to the temple. At least let it go to the temple, not be a total waste. No, you can't do that. Can't turn it into a burnt offering. By the way, the guy with the shore hamuad who allows his shore to kill himself is held to a very high standard, for that. So what does it mean here? Why do we mean that they're asurin lamizbeach? It means that if they were still allowed to the hedyot, it means they weren't complete. They'd have to get destroyed. Let's say there wasn't a witness. It means that if they're still permissible to the hedyot, it means this animal may have brought about a person's death. There's no witnesses, or it's circumstantial. Mm-hmm. So the owner could still, let's say, slaughter the ox instead of and eat it. One witness to the crime. And the owners don't know. Well, they're quiet. There's nothing they could say. They weren't there. They can't comment. The owners just say, balim is written in plural, but it means the owner sometimes. Just the man is the owner. He says, yeah, I think my ox killed a person. I'm pretty sure my ox killed a person. There's no witnesses who are not. He can't testify because he's no geah, and there's no two other witnesses who saw this. If there's no witnesses. Remember, the owner is not a witness. He may have witnessed it, literally. He saw it, but he's not a legal witness. Or you see there's one witness who's not the owner, but the owners disagree. They deny what he says. Okay? Contradict what the witness says. So these are mutarin. Okay. Even for the mizbeach. Okay. Hold on. Let me see something here. So these first two cases over here, if you put the period over here, I was confused here. I have a period. I put also something here, klal. Okay. Those first kinds. So these are what I'm highlighting here. These are kind that you really shouldn't offer as a korban. Okay. And the ones over here in the second sense, these are mutter. Okay, this case is different. Okay, completely mutter. And the first two over here, from ben unru until klal, those are forbidden to this beach, but still permissible to regular people. Okay, I was confused. I'm looking at the Machon Mamre. I shouldn't. He put a what do you call it over here? Semicolon. Where you have a period. So I also put my own marks, and I should be reading my own thing. Okay. An animal that they were playing with it. Okay, means they instigated it. And the gourd, I mentioned this last week because I mentioned this in Spanish when I first talked about an animal that killed a person. And then it killed a person. We said this is the case of the bullfighter, for example, or the cockfight, or the people they let dogs fight with each other. Okay. So the problem is cockfight and dogfights. You just have animal against animal, so that's not a problem. But in a bullfight, you actually get a person in there, and person might get hurt. So we said in such a case, the bull that beat the matador and survived hasn't been disqualified from temple service. Why? Because it wasn't its fault. It's still, even though there are tons of witnesses. Maybe there are two Jews in the stands who witnessed what happened. It's still kosher for sacrifice. Why? This poor animal has been forced into this. Okay, animal pushed into killing a person is not disqualified. This statement seems to make sense. We're not going to argue with this one. This animal is only disqualified from being a rovea or nirba if the person, at least for regard to nirba, if the person who did this to the animal, who sodomized the animal, was ben teisha shanim in yom echad, ben Yisraeli, ben goy o eved, whether this male is a Jew or a Gentile or an Eved Kanani, born Gentile but now halfway through by joining the Jewish people. Hoyel urva'ah adam nifsala, being that it did this to a person has been disqualified. Now, let's see, there's a little bit of an argument over here. Let me see this. Oh, 1 second. Should I read the Ravad here? No, I think there's different versions. I'm going to read the next paragraph and then we'll get into the Ravid says, okay? So what is the premise of what the Rambam's saying here? The Rambam's saying here that the only act of sexuality by a person can be performed by a person who's 9 years old. If before that age, they're not mature enough, so it's not concerned. They're not capable of an act of bia, as they say. So to a 9-year-old, is assumed cannot do anything that an adult could do. Next, vima adam hu shenirba min habima. If this had been the person that the animal did this to, the animal's a roveya, so the person's the nirba. It has to be at least done to a woman who's the threshold, like we said in Surabia, she's 3 years old in a day. So this is the thing that's questionable. Okay, right over here, this line. If the animal does it to a male, so it has to be a male who's capable of relations, and that's 9 years old. So the Ravid basically says over here, this is a good point. If it's the animal that's doing the work, so to speak, it's a male animal, whatever, mounting a person and doing something terrible to that person. So what does it matter how old that person is? I understand for the person to have done something wrong to the animal, the person has to be the human has to be capable of a sexual act. But for this, if the animal's the active partner, if you call it a partner, the active one in the act, so it shouldn't be. I'll read you what the Ravid says. For those of you who don't have Ravid here, why did Machon Mamre put the Ravid? So they own the Makbili also. It's because they don't hold the Ravid doesn't count for the Rambam. Just focus on Rambam. I don't know. It's good to bring it. It's like Ravid's on the Rambam page, like Tosfos is to the Rashi, or the Ramban is to Rashi on the Torah. You need that other perspective. Okay. Amar Avraham Zeh Mechaber Dima Isur Mizbeach Isur Skila. This author, okay, he's talking about the Rambam, compares the Isur Mizbeach to Isur Skila. Isur Skila means an animal engaged in these acts, or humans engaged in forbidden relations. That's the Isur Skila. Has one threshold. The age threshold is the same. Maybe they're not the same. If you had an animal that had been sodomized, but it's al pi habelim, it's according to the testimony of the owners, o al pi echad, or just one witness, she'eno b'mita, this animal will not be put to death because you need 2 witnesses to put the animal to death. However, ufasula mizbeach, ho'il ne'evda ba'avira. Should be ne'evra. I have a dollar there. Okay, he says it's the point that puzzles it from this beach is not that it's a legal thing about witnesses, that we know this animal was involved in this violation, so it shouldn't be mipnei shehu ma'us, because this animal is disgusting, it's repulsive, it's rejected. That's the whole point. Wima be'ma nir ba'ah, if the animal had been sodomized, vadai ba'inan sheheha rovea ben tesha shanim v'yom echad. If we're talking about the animal getting I guess, bestialized by a human, so of course the human has to be a 9-year-old male. Because only 9-year-olds capable of doing such thing, at least. The gam ein la mimena v'anusa. What did the animal do? The animal didn't want this person doing this to him. By the way, this explicit Mishnah in Nida 5.5 says this. Okay, the animal is only disqualified if it's nearby, if it's done to, if the person who did it to this animal was 9 years old at least. However, aval kishabe ma rovaat, when the animal is doing this, it's a male animal, shenanate min avera, where it's getting benefit from this avera, even though the animal doesn't know it's an avera, it's just an animal. But interesting, he's using human terminology to explain why does this, I guess, this bull do what it's doing? Apparently, because it's not. Bulls don't have all these different perversions that we have nowadays. If a bull is excited and trying to do its thing, it's because it enjoys it from a strictly animalistic standpoint. And it should be finding a nice cow, but whatever, there was a person there. Mifselet mikol makom. When the animal is doing this, it doesn't really matter who this person is. The bull doesn't know, is this child 9 years old in 3 days, or 8 years old and 360 days? it doesn't. There's no difference. The bull is doing what it's doing, so the bull should be disqualified from the altar. So the Rambam takes the basically like the Ravid says, the Rambam takes the comparison with the Isuri Bia laws to the complete extent, and the Ravid says no. So too, the Rambam would say that this bull has to basically attack a female human who's 3 years old at least, and the Ravid would say no. If the bull did it even to a 2-year-old girl, what does it matter? You know, the bull was doing what it's doing, and it's a ma'us, so the bull should be disqualified. I'm very sorry we have to talk about these things, but some people are surprised that we have this in the shir, but what are you going to do? We have to go through the Rambam. Yeah.
Is it possible that it's related to Gikuha?
Yeah, going to say that. Let's say they provoked an animal into doing such a thing.
Right.
I would think even higichua, if they provoke the animal into doing this, an animal to fight back. When the matador starts to, they have those guys poke the bull and the red cape and everything. The animal, and by the way, the animal fights because the animal needs to.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know how it is that you could say that the animal was completely anus when it seems to have gotten this thing. I think you don't arouse an animal against its will. You can make the animal enjoy it. It says the Torah commands a woman not to stand in front of an animal and get the animal to do these things to it.
Mm-hmm.
But the animal can't say, "Oh, she made me do it," because the animal, like they say, a man can't claim rape if he was able to sustain an erection. Why? Because if you're really, if the animal was able to get doing what it normally does, it must be the animal was enjoying it. Understand? Like that's what the Ravid says. The Ravid says here, okay? If it was the animal was forced into this, it's an anusa. It has no hana from this. But if it was doing this, the animals, it shows that the animal's the rovea. It shows that the animal, no matter what, was enjoying. So the animal's now a ma'us. So the animal should be disqualified. There's no such thing as an animal's anus into being the rovaat. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Like I said, so put I guess even a PG-13 on this video, not for children, but halachahi b'lilmod anachnu tzrichin. We have to learn these halachas. I'm sure they come up. I wonder how often does this happen that animals do this. I hope they want to know if I can understand. Like I said, there are perverts out there who have a thing for animals. So that's the Nirba case. We've seen examples of that. I've never seen cases of Rovea. Perhaps someone could enlighten me. And may it never ever happen again. Let's get into this case of muktzeh. This is the people doing something to the animal in order to dedicate it to Avodah Zarah. Once the priests, idolatrous priests, do something to it. Yagozu or Yigzazu? What do you have? I have Yagozu in here, but here they write Yigzazu. Yagozu. So maybe, is it possible that this Zion in the Machon Mamre is supposed to be a Vav, Yagozu, like we have in the Makbili in the Koran, or it's just the full verb? Okay, Tachosu. The plural, the shorish of Tachosu is Kaf Samich Samich. Yagozu, the shorish is there's a dot in the Zion to show you that there's a missing Zion. Yeah, good. So we know our grammar. In a second, we're going to also mention something. We're going to have our weekly grammar lesson. Oh, Yavdubo with Shem Avodah Zarah. They do some work with it for the sake of Avodah Zarah. Not that they worship. They have to do something. I guess plow with it in the Avodah Zarah field, or I don't know, to do the Avodah Zarah dance, something. Aval bidvarim. In this case, it means they shear Zarah. Aval bidvarim. If they just said this animal is the muktzah animal, it's the Baal's animal. Eno naaseh muktzeh. It doesn't become set aside for Avodah Zarah. Shein hekdesh la Avodah Zarah. There's no such as hekdesh for Avodah Zarah. Hekdesh is something that exists for a temple. What is hekdesh? This animal is dedicated to the temple. This animal is supposed to be a korban. This animal, its value is for the temple. That's hekdesh. Just by a person declaring something belonging for the temple or as being sacrificial, that does the trick. But you can't say that with Avodah Zarah. Even, thank God, if a Jew would say that animal will be a burnt offering to the Baal, or I'm going to donate that animal to the church, doesn't mean anything. This is the Rambam's understanding. You should just know the Ravid has the exact opposite understanding of this halacha. I'll read you what the Ravid says. Yesh basfarm shalanu nuscha achrina. We have a totally different nusach. Ein muktzeh aser ela ad sha'a sheyagozu o sheyavdu bo klal. Okay, it's not muktzeh and aser. The is only aser until they actually then do something like shear it or they use it for work. The misha sheyagozu oto, or when they shear it, for example, kavar batla hakzato v'chilaluhu. Okay, really, the dedication is when they take the sheep, for example, they say this sheep is for the Baal, but the second they use it for mundane work, they set it out, I don't know, to pull the lawnmower, or they shear it, they are effectively removing its status as muktzeh. That demuktzatizes it. The haktza'ah, the thing that makes it forbidden, is when they declare that it is dedicated to avodah zarah. So Devarim is what makes it avodah zarah, makes it muktzah, and it's when they actually do something that shows now it's mundane, they start to use it for mundane purposes, but mundane from their perspective, that it's no longer muktzah.
Then how can you know?
What? How could you know?
Yeah.
Well, you see that you were probably there. You were watching. They say that this sheep is meant to be, the Baal's sheep. It's
Everything it has to be with.
well, remember it said we assume that they don't do this to those animals, but you knew it. And then one day you see them just shearing it like the other ones. They put it out to pasture with the other ones. Well, what good are sheep, by the way? Can you do any work with sheep? Let's say it was a bull. A bull you could do all sorts of things with.
Yeah.
The sheep you generally shear them. A bull you have. What's the profit you get out of the bull while it's alive? Raw, grunt work. So that's why they gave these two examples. So which one do we have Paskin like? This is exactly opposites. There's one Gersa of the Gemara, which basically the Rambam brings, which gives the standard, and the exact opposite one is brought by the Ravid. So good question. We'll make another note of these things. By the time we get the temple going, we'll have to know the answer to this fundamental question, or the Sanhedrin will have to decide. I was asking someone, we have Mishnaic terminology in plural. I'll give you 4 examples. There's Gitin and Gerushin. Gerushin. Gerush is a normal Hebrew word in the PL form, like Chinuch. Okay? And Dibur. So there's Gerush, divorce. But we use it in plural. We say Gerushin. Divorces. That's the active of divorce. That's meant in Mishnah, Gerushin. And we talk about Erusin. Erusin is engagement or consecration, betrothal. And the other word for Erusin is Kiddushin. Right? They're basically halachically equivalent. Kiddushin. Also in plural, another PL in plural. Erusin is with the Tzerei because the Reish doesn't get a Dagesh.
Yeah.
And just like Gerushin, there's a Tzerei under the Gimel because the Reish doesn't get a Dagesh. There's Kiddushin. And then there's Nisuin. Nisuin is the actual marriage, the second stage. Once again, that's done in the plural. Yet we learned Yavamis, and what do we find there? There's an act of Yibum. Yabemota. That's actually in the PL in the Torah. Gerush is something in the Torah. Garei Shama Zod Vepana. Yes, PL there. Nisuin is not in the Torah. It's only in later biblical Mishnaic terminology. It used to be Likuchin. He takes her. And Erusin, Me'orasa. Yeah, that's a hofal. It's a pual. That's a pool of the PO. Ares, Eras Dechli, so that exists. Okay, so the PL of that exists. All these are in the plural. Yibum also is in the PL in the Torah, but we do not read about Yibumin. There's no Yibumin. It's called Yibum and Chalitza. Why didn't the sages in Mishnaic language pluralize the act of Yibum like they did with Erusin and Kiddushin and Nisuin and Gerushin? By the way, Eruvin would be similar to this. Eruvin is also a plural. Eruvin is entirely non-biblical. Okay, Eruvin is, I think, the key to this. Eruvin is entirely rabbinic enactments, Mishnaic basically. So all the terminology will be to Eruvin because you will not find Eruvin discussed in the Torah period. So why are all these in plural, but Yibum is not in plural? So here's the answer I'm offering. Eruvin means you have to have 2 parties who are not one household, and they share one Rishus Yachid. It's halachically a Rishus Yachid. What's going on here on Shabbos? It's a Rishus Yachid that there's the 4 walls around this, or it's roofed or something. It's a courtyard which you and I share. And because we do not share our food, you have your own house, I have my own house. And even though I fed you tonight, that's just because you're my guest. But really, you're responsible for your own food. I eat at my table with my family. You eat with the guys in yeshiva, and hunky dory. So if we would share a domain on Shabbos and we wanted to act like it's a real Rosh Hashanah, we wanted to move stuff between the Rishuyot. So we would have to share our food before Shabbos. We'd have to create a union by taking the food and saying this is joint food. We're sharing our meal, so now we could share our domain. And if there were 5 such householders, Bali Batim, and who's sharing one chatzer, that's halachically Rosh Hashanah, but Chazal said don't carry there until you make an eruv, so they would have to join together. But I don't have to make an eruv with my wife. Our house is also Rosh Hashanah, and I have to say that before Shabbos, I have to go out of my way and say, you know what, wife, we're going to have to make an eruv for Shabbos that we could carry within our own house or within our chutzner, right? Why don't I have to do that? Because assume that if 2 people are that close, marriage, they're sharing food. Like there's no such takana. So too with my children. My son lives under my house. He's 20. I don't have to say, well, he lives in a different room within this large. We own an apartment building with 2 apartments. He lives in the other apartment. I don't have to make an eruv with my son. He hasn't gone out and become his own person yet, even though he's a bar mitzvah. We're still sharing food. So the answer is that with regards to Erusin, Kiddushin, Nisuin, and Gerushin, what do you need to affect all of these? The most important thing, halachically, midoraisa, you need witnesses. In order for me to affect Kiddushin and Erusin and Nisuin and Gerushin chas v'shalom, I need to get 2 other men who are unrelated to me to witness what's going on. Whereas to conduct a halachic yibum, what is the standard? Chazal said, technically she's hers. The brother died without any children. It's his job to just take her into the house, and that's it. There's no, yes, Chazal institutes so it doesn't look so unseemly. There should be a ma'amar and an act in for the based in what he's doing. But technically speaking, yibum is, go home and have yichud. Yichudin also. There's no such thing as yichudin. Just go home. That's it. You don't need to. She is his wife. Just like you don't have to make an eruv with your own wife, but if you're doing it with another guy who's not, you have to, then now it's plural. So too, ishto kagufo dami. They're already one person. There's no yibumim. You do not need witnesses for such a thing. For chalitza, they happen to have to go to the basement. That's not witnesses. Chalitza also doesn't need witnesses. It's not 2 edim. Chalitza is done with the zakenim, and they have to tell him, like they have to give him musar and all that. That's a totally different gezeres hakasuf. That's not witnesses. So whenever you have witnesses, then it's 2 Jews unrelated to each other getting together for something. Chazal used the plural, and for yibum, for example, they didn't do this. And I think this law stands up. We could find other examples. I think this is the general rule. When there's witnesses, Chazal used a plural. Okay, let's get into the next thing. Next halacha. So where are we? Here. We said that in this halacha, Dalad Gimel. So no, Dalad Dalid. Completely, totally different understandings between the regions. Once again, the animal that had been sodomized or this to a person. Whoa. Adam Oser Masha Shelo or Shel Chaviro. Doesn't matter if it's his animal or his friends. Another Jews. Bain ba'ones bain ratzon. Doesn't matter what the onus was. Said, no, don't do this. My animal. The animal wasn't willing. He's objecting. Bain zidonom bain mishkaga. Doesn't matter if it was a zadon or something that was done intentionally or unintentionally. Didn't realize. I didn't know this was usher. Shkaga means I didn't know such thing was forbidden. I didn't know it would forbid the animal. Bain lifnei akdesha, bain lachar akdesha. Whether it happened before the animal was dedicated to the temple or not, this qualifies the animal. Harezo asura lemizbeach. It is forbidden for the mizbeach. Now look at this whole thing. Bain chaviro. This is a rovei nirba. Why does it be? I did this to your animal. Let's say someone goes into your, someone breaks into your house and decides to do something terrible to your sheep. You're going to use this sheep as a chatas. It's a female, and someone did this. And what are you going to do? So you say, oh, but I didn't want him to do it. He was an intruder. I didn't ask my permission. Certainly, I would never have done such a thing. And but he did it. It's still nifsal. But with the muktzah, it's different. Imaya shelo v'iktzah kodem she yakdish nifsal. Muktzah, if it was his, and it had been huktzah before it had been before it had been dedicated. So of course it's been disqualified. Hikza shel chaviro. But let's say I take your sheep, and I decide I'm going to dedicate your sheep to Gentile, to avodah zarah, to idolatry. Oh, six shelo acharak shek to show. Or I dedicated the sheep to, let's say, the temple. I made it by Korban Pesach, and then I went and said, you know what? I'm donating it to the church. That's a huktzah. Harei mutter. It's like I did nothing. She'ein adam maktzeh davar she'einu shelo. A person cannot muktzatize, for lack of a better word, dedicate into a terrible to a bad purpose. Say it's already not his. That is, if it's not mine to begin with, or it's already been dedicated to the temple. I can't go to the temple offering, whether it's in my possession or not, and say, you know what, it's for avodah zarah now. Doesn't count. Or it's not mine. So you have to see there's a fundamental difference. The roveh nearby, you're actually doing something to the animal. What are you going to do? It's a ma'us. Yes, a person can't go to temple property. Remember, it says even temple property. If a person breaks into the holy temple and finds a lishkata tlaim, what's lishkata tlaim? That's where they keep all the extra sheep for regular purposes. Remember, 2 sheep every day. Shabbos 4 sheep. Holidays you need 7 sheep. And if it's a Shabbos Chol Hamoed, oh boy, you need a whole load of sheep. Okay, Shabbos, the first day of Sukkot. How many sheep do you need? So you need 4 sheep just for Shabbos and another 14 because it's Sukkot, right? So you need 18 sheep. And if it's Shabbos Rosh Hashanah, you need 4 sheep plus another 7, another 18 sheep. So that's a lot of sheep. So they always had extra sheep sitting around there. Person breaks into the temple sheep pen and decides to do these terrible things to them. So he's disqualified then. Okay? Because now they're disgusting. What are you going to do? But in this case, if it's just an active huktzah, so you can't do that. Ein adam oser shenu ma shenu shaloer shel chaviro. And there's a sugya I always like. I remember learning this originally. Rabbi Akiva Eiger discusses Tanai Chazara. It's in Reish Nun Gimel and Orach Chaim. Be off the plata. You can't start spooning chillin'. It's sitting there on whatever, on the blech, whatever it is, right out of the crock pot. You can't do that. So what do you gotta do? What do they teach you? So you have to lift it out and keep a hand on it and spoon it onto your plate, and then put it back. Okay, make sure you keep your hand on it and don't put it on the floor. It's called Tanai Chazar. So the Shulchan Aruch, if you have das, according to the way read from the Rambam, you could take the children off the fire, even for a few minutes. As long as it's a chumrah to say you have to keep your hand on. Rabbi Akiva Eiger talks about the case, well, he's mistapik. It's your cholent. Ganef walks into your house, middle of the night, the burglar, what's he going to do at midnight? And you're intent to eat it at noon, a whole 12 hours from now, and it needs those 12 hours. He wants to stay hot. And what does he do? He's real mischievous. He takes your children, he puts it on the floor directly. He says, and my das is not to put it back. Dafka, I want it on the floor, I'm done. No Tanai Chazara whatsoever, and bolts out the window. And you come running in with your shotgun, and you find that you heard him just say that he's putting this cholent on the floor and that's it. And you find that he didn't take any of your personal belongings, but your cholent's now sitting on their own floor. But he destroyed your chazara, and you have no Tanai Chazara, you have no da'as, etc. So do you have to leave your cholent on the floor there and suffer through a cold cholent on later that day on Shabbos, or can you say, I'm putting my cholent back on the fire, back on the plata, I can't put it on the fire. No, Tanai Chazara, it's still hot, so I'm going to put it back on. So Rabbi Akiva Eiger there says that I don't think Ein Adam Oser Davar Sheinu Shalo applies in this case because it's talking about a Maisa was done to it. He gives a very good argument there. You can read it inside. I put up on the screen here, but I want to finish more of these halachot. A lot of the editions of the printed Shulchan Aruch don't have the complete Rabbi Akiva Eiger, including all the ones we have in the base Medrash here. So I had to go across the street to go get it. So I took a picture. Thank God for the Friedman edition. When we learned Gruz and Rabbi Akiva Eiger, so they have the whole thing there. And he gives a good argument that basically Rabbi Akiva Eiger concludes that in this case it seems that you have to leave the plata on the floor, the cholent on the floor, because it was a ma'isa done to. Of course, the other side is, which he doesn't bring up. He's basically discussing this idea of Ein Adam Oser Davar Sheinu Shalo. That's talking about turning this into what's called, I guess, in brisker terminology, Chetz Shel Isser. When it's talking about an animal, can this animal is psuli mizbeach? or Yisurim Mizbeach.
Mhm.
So what someone did creates an Isser, even if it's not his. Even if he does it to temple property, he could ruin temple property by doing the lewd acts with these animals.
Mhm.
But this chefza, this cholent is not a chefza shel Isser. It's not a thing. It's muktzah. The question was really doraisa. I could take a hot pot of cholent if it's still like significantly hot. It's only been on the floor for like a minute,
Mhm.
and I could put it on a place that's not going to an real act of cooking. Kira grufer ktuma. We assume that our platas and blechs are whatever. Mutter kira grufer ktuma, where you could do chazar, assuming the t'nai chazar. The t'nai chazar were a chasal institution
Mhm.
to prevent me from coming to cook on Shabbos. So if I'm not violating what Chazal said, so I should be allowed to do chazara. If someone who's not me has no right to touch my stuff, puts my cholent on the floor, I want my cholent there. I haven't done anything wrong. Chazal say, no, you can't now put your cholent back on the plata. Chazal instituted these Tanoim, whatever how many they are. Like I said, machlokas. So we the Rishalmi, like the Gra on the Shulchan Aruch seems to be very makel. The Ramah is much more machmir, as well. I think he even keep a hand on it. Those Tanoim are lechatchila. But if I'm an anus and I couldn't keep the Tanai, let's say Rabbi Kiva Eger say that if I'm holding the cholent like a good yeshiva guy, and then someone comes running in and grabs my hand off the cholent and says, "Ha! Now you can't put your cholent back on the blech." Would I not be able to put my cholent on the blech? I'm doing what Chazal said. I didn't do anything wrong.
Mm.
So there's an argument to be made that yes, Rabbi Kiva is right that Ein Adam Oser Davar Shalino Shalo doesn't apply in the cholent case, and he has ossered my cholent. But it's not such a case. We're not talking about intrinsic prohibition. Okay, Ein Adam Oser Mashiach Shalo was talking about a person causing a metaphysical transformation in the object that's now disqualified. It now has an Isser Hana'ah or an Isser Mizbeach put upon it, but not that it's not fully cooked on Shabbos. It's still my stuff. And Rabbi Soloveitchik's case in the book, the Rav Schefter's book, said that there was a woman who at the school in Boston had to give a class to the names of God that you're not allowed to erase. Right? It's in halacha. These names, you write them out, you can't erase them. So she took the chalk. Back then, they used to have chalkboards. You probably haven't gone to school where there's a chalkboard ever, right? Really? Because by the time I was in college, they phased out chalkboards. It's all whiteboards. By the time you get to high school and college, so if you had an elementary school, they have chalkboards, but even then they're phasing them out for good reason. They're dirty. They're not good for breathing. Just chalk dust everywhere. Either way, so she took the blackboard, the chalkboard, used to be called, but even though some of them were green, and she basically wrote very clearly, here's these 7 names. She wrote the 4-letter name and Elohim and the rest of them on the blackboard. You're not allowed to erase these names. Now, she was hired by the school to teach this to the kids, so she did it beheter. So the question put before Soloveitchik was, now, wait, we can't erase the blackboard. And he posted, can. She wrote God's names on the blackboard. You cannot erase the blackboard. It's in storage in the basement, and it's done. It has to go to Geniza. Okay? Or like the guy who writes God's name on his arm. How's he going to go bathe now? Or go to mikvahs? He has to cover it up and make sure he doesn't bring about its erasure. Anything you write on your skin, if you don't tattoo it, eventually your skin is going to overturn and it's going to come off. But you can't go and actively erase that. So those are cases of the Moser Davar Shem Shalom. Okay, let's get back to this. So here's the differences between the muktzah and the nevad. So we saw a major nafkamina here. The roveh and the nirba doesn't really matter. What a person does to this animal, it's a ma'us. You can't say, well, it's my animal. I didn't want him to do that, but what are you going to do? He's did it. It's now a repulsive animal, for better or for worse. Maybe you could sue him for your loss and dedicate a new animal. That's not what we're discussing here. We're not talking to Zeke and Chiyuv Mamanis, but it's still like that. But if it's Huktzeh, and he says, he made my animal dedicated to Vodazar, he can't dedicate your animal to Vodazar, and you can't dedicate a temple's animal to Vodazar, so it's a garnished. Hanevad. Let's say the fourth case, the animal is worshipped. So can I worship your chavera, your animal? Bein shavad shelo, bein shel chavero, bein ben os bein rotzo, bein bezon, bein mishkaga, bein lifnei hekdesh, bein lachar hekdesh, hariza asur. I worship your animal, so I've also prohibited it. What? Why? Okay. So we're gonna continue with this. Just hold on to that idea. So what do you do with such a animal? You're pulbo mum kavua. You put that Moshe Biarnu. You're not. It's not a loss completely for you. Let it develop a mum. Let it go out to pasture. Develop a mum, and then we'll redeem it. Yeah, recoup the money, like we explained before. So in this case, also you can say, it's my chavero. You can't worship my sheep. You walk out my sheep pen and you start bowing down to my sheep, and you build yourself a little altar there and offer Torahs in front of my sheep. So you now prohibited my sheep, technically speaking, yeah. Hanevad hu v'chol ma'shelav asurim mizbeach. Whatever, even if what do they usually decorate these animals that they're worshiping? You go to India, they put a wreath around its neck or some other sign. So whatever they did back in the old days, it was more of a desire. So this thing would have been more obvious. Shechol tzipuye ne'avad. All the things that are adorning, again, this literally means that coat the animal that's worshipped. Asurin b'hanaya. They're forbidden for anah because they're connected to idolatry. Muktzeh hu asur. If it's an animal that's dedicated to idolatry but not worshipped itself, let's say it was dedicated as a korban for the animal, what's called tikroves. If it had a saddle on it, or they put a coat on a bell, a wreath around this animal, they said this animal is going to be a korban, so they gave it a wreath around its neck to show that it's whatever it's supposed to be. So that's not prohibited to the altar. Okay. So let's see what the Rambam says here. So the Ravid. Okay. So well,
that last one, but
well,
worship is a thing that you do to the object.
Worship, but it doesn't. You don't have to touch my animal. You could worship my sheep by standing 10 feet away from it. So why is it prohibited? Ein adam oser davar shein shalo. You told me that if it's muktzah, you can't go to my sheep and say that animal's a korban. That animal's dedicated to the church. That's animal. Like it's nothing. That's my animal. You can't do it. But if you worship my animal, you start bowing down to it and saying, "Animal, please save me. You're my God."
Yeah.
You prohibited my animal? How does that work? You just told me you can't do anything to my animal by just speaking about it. If you wanted to prohibit it, what?
It's not yours to not yours to transfer ownership. But this has nothing to do with ownership.
Well, you didn't transfer ownership. You worshipped it. So anybody, I have to watch out that someone's going to come outside my house and start worshiping my property. If I have my cup, my ceremonial cup, someone starts worshiping my cup. He says it's an idol. He turns it into an idol. Now my cup is forbidden. Read what the Ravid says. You don't have the Ravid, so I'll read you the Ravid. You can go get. By the way, there's other copies of Rambam here in the base bench that have the Ravid. You don't have to use Makbili. Bain shavad shalo, bain shulchavir. Whether he worshipped his own animal or his friend's animal. Omar Avram, the Maseches Avodah Zarah, Nindal Domadal. They give you the source. Ukmua shel chaviro bisha asa b'maise. If you worship the other guy's animal and you make it a prohibition, you have to have done a maisa. If you didn't get to that animal, you stood far away on the other side of the fence, you're worshiping that sheep, it's not actually becoming prohibited through this act. He has to get his hands on the animal, do something. Because ein adam oser davar she'eno shelo. Unless he actually does something to it. Okay? So that's what the Ravid points out. Das Ravid eno aser behema shel chavro el kashasa maisa begufa, as El Kareem puts it. Okay. So see, did we see this oath? Yeah, we mentioned that. So you understand that the Ravid is clarifying something. If we just read the Rambam the way we did first time, okay. Well, I'm saying we got a question from someone online. Let me see if it's relevant. I like it when people send their questions. I told them send them to Zoom. Yeah, okay. That was a good question. How do you kosher something that's stainless steel? How do you kosher glass? I remember someone asked me, how do you kosher glass? I got this from America, like before Passover last year. How do you kosher glass? So I said, well, they say that whole thing with fill it with water 3 times. But there's Rishonim who say that glass doesn't absorb it. Ain't no bolea or bolat. So there's no hagala, there's no libun. If you try to libun glass, you'll just destroy it, and then you'll have to melt it down and do it again. So like Rabbi Soloveitchik learned, like Rav Shechter says, like Rabbi Antman pointed out, Rabbi Lioris points out, Rabbi Barachim has given a shir about this one. Certain materials just don't absorb, so there's no inyan of koshering, technically speaking. And then I remember guys asking me, forget about it. Assume, he says, like the Ashkenazic practice of treating glass like it's balea. How do I then kosher it? I said, assuming that reality is not reality and your glass is absorbing taste, so you'd have to kosher it if it's used for hot liquids. So you have to do hagala to it. And if you're frying in the glass or using the glass as an oven pan in your oven, so you have to do libun to it. Whatever it is, kivolo kach polto. So the question was, you have a frying pan, stainless steel, perfectly stainless steel frying pan that had been used normally for frying cheese omelets. Now they fried the steak in there. So that's the one. The steak is usually, if the steak had been there with cheese at the same time, so of course you throw away the steak and the cheese, it's done. You can't even sell that to recoup your loss. But you got to first clean the frying pan. But can you kosher a stainless steel frying pan? Normally a frying pan, in order to kosher it, because used for the wrong thing, or let's say you want to kosher a Passover, you got to do libun to it. Okay, the temperatures in the frying pan is much higher than boiling water. The pot in which you boil your noodles, the noodle water gets a little bit above the boiling point of water. Why? Because you put salt in there and there's other things dissolved in the water. So the water achieves a temperature a little bit more than 100 Celsius. So you do hagala. You purge that pot in a larger pot, boiling water. But stainless steel, you could do an act of purging, but honest to God, libun, you're not going to, doesn't accomplish anything. You could do it, but it's not like you necessarily need to. Which is why l'chadchila, you should have separate forks and knives for milk and fleshik like we have. But nowadays everything is stainless steel. No one uses silverware. It's called silverware, but because it used to be made of silver. Nowadays, there's
not observant at all.
Yeah, it doesn't. It's a physical impossibility. So there's nothing you could do. So you just have to clean it well with soap. And that's the honest truth. So yeah, it's a very difficult thing. What are you going to do? You should have separate kalim for these things, but the Evid, there's no active koshering. It's not accomplishing anything. It's like once again, let's talk about the haseva on Passover. So Rabbi Barachim has popularized the position. It's already in the Rishonim saying that nowadays we sit at tables and chairs. We don't lean on a couch to eat. So there's some people still machmir. So they get a nice armchair and they get themselves a pillow and they'll drink the wine. I'll demonstrate. They go like this. But here's the upshot of what Rabbi Barachim is saying. Even those people who are machmir to lean over and drink their wine are not accomplishing what Chazal said. They're being machmir but they're not accomplishing anything because they're not on a couch. Unless they have their feet up and they're on this like nice padded bench or on a couch or a bed or something, they're not doing the haseva of Chazal anyways. So the machlokas isn't to do haseva or not nowadays. The machlokas is, do you attempt and fail or you just don't try? So the Rav Yil and the Rabbi Barachim, they're not even trying because they know it's not relevant. And the others who are machmir to do haseva and lean over like this are trying and failing, but no one does it. Okay, so what are you going to do? You could kosher your stainless steel equipment. You could go through the act of koshering it, but you haven't accomplished anything because it didn't absorb anything. It didn't purge anything. Next, this halacha. Should be a good one. We did this nevad. Okay, he says a guy is bowing down to a mountain. What do you mean a mountain? Who owns the mountain? Okay. Well, assuming the mountain has some shaykhs to him. Even though the mountain has not been prohibited, you can still climb that mountain and use it for your own purposes. Wow. You shouldn't use its stones. By the way, it's talking about, once again, his own mountain. Obviously, they're not going to tell that you do this to someone else's stones. We just said in order to do it. Yeah. Means he has his own mountain. Let's say some people own a lot of property. So he worships his own mountain. He can't prohibit part of the ground, right? But just like he can worship his tree, if he worships his own tree, he makes an asher, and now you got to cut it down. So too the stones are disconnected from this mountain, should not be used for the mizbeach. See, this is a key word. He has a spring that emerges in his own property. Okay, he has a nice spring. Imagine having property. You can have your own spring. Right? You'd be so rich that you own a mountain and you own your own spring and your own estate. Okay, so what do you got there? So that water should not be used for the nesech. That is when do we make a libation of water on Sukkot? Okay. Technically speaking, you take the water from anywhere in the world. Ashirasha bitula or butula in this case, or batula, depends on how you vowelize it. If imishu bitel, so it's butla. In this case, batula is just the standard. It itself became batel. So I should have mentioned this before. Only a Gentile can affect bitul avodah zarah. If you have an idol, let's say, you could de-idolize it or rise it by what? A Gentile fellow who not necessarily someone who worships idols, but a Gentile going and saying, this is a garnished, it's nothing, doing something of act of scorn to this idol, and now the idol, let's say it's gold, now the Jew can acquire the gold. But a Jew can't acquire an idol, it becomes Isur Anah, so you shouldn't touch it. Because let a Gentile do the act of bittul first. Or the Jew can't buttle anything that's in his own possession. A Jew cannot affect this, it's a garnished, it's nothing, now he can take it as property. He has to have a non-Jew around to do it for him. What was the question?
Grossman?
Yeah.
If that's the case, why are Jews allowed to turn a church into a synagogue?
A church isn't necessarily a chetz avodah zarah; it's connected to the ground.
I see.
And what they should do is the fact that the Gentiles are selling off their church, they're selling it away. They're showing it's a garnish. Let's say an actual base of avodah zarah has statues within it, right? Statues attached to the facade, right? You could say that when the Gentiles are doing the sale, they're effectively nullifying the avodah zarah that's there. That makes sense?
Yeah.
So that's what you have them do, and that's what I think they normally do. Even a crucifix, they could leave a crucifix as a nice silver crucifix, right? People wear them around their neck. That's a religious item to them. If they go and say "Das is the garnished," or they do something else about it, or their picture of who, the guy in the underpants, or whatever other idol they have. Second, they say, this is just nothing, and they're willing to, and they sell it off to you. It's who cares? So now you made a good acquisition. You shouldn't leave it around looking like an idol anymore. You should melt it down and use its precious metal, or take out the gemstones, whatever it is. But technically use it. I think, what is that? I remember the first time I saw this. I was unfortunately got to see, my father showed me in Brownsville in East New York, old synagogues that had been converted into churches. Drove through, what do you call it? King's Highway, and the street that connects to it. I forgot what the name is, the eastern spur of that street that goes basically from the Jackie Robinson Parkway westbound into Flatbush. I've driven must have driven 100 times.
Rabbi Grossman,
What?
Rabbi Grossman?
Yeah.
There's another interesting thing I thought about. I once heard that atheism is considered worse than avodah zarah. Is that something you've heard?
I know that an atheist is just a big kofar. I don't know what's worse. I don't know how God's punishing the atheists or the avodah zarah. I can understand how philosophically it's worse, but the atheist who doesn't, let's say, bow down to any idol, we have no reason to stone him.
Right. The question is whether atheistic literature advocating atheism could have a din of a chefetz avodah zarah.
That's not a chefetz avodah zarah. It's forbidden for losa surah charei levavchem. Okay, don't charei nechem. You're not to stray after your eyes and after your heart. Forbidden because it's forbidden. It doesn't have to be avodah zarah in order to be outright kfira. Don't forget, there's also forms of Judaism which are also outright kfira. Yeah, Karaites and everybody the Rambam calls the Sadducees and everybody the Rambam lumps with the Sadducees are all various forms of heretics who have no share in the world to come and all that. Yeah. That's a big problem also.
Regarding the New Testament, for that matter, the Quran, would that, if we're to assume that the Quran, Islam is also avodah zarah, then the question is one allowed to read those materials for not out of belief reasons, but out of academic interest, or is that also an issue?
Scholars are supposed to be familiar with the writings of the idolaters in order to engage in debate with them, in order to try them.
Only those scholars.
Yeah.
Designated to do it.
Yeah, only the ones who are qualified to do so don't have to do so. The Beis Din who has to judge these matters have to be familiar with these things. I don't know. Look, I've barely tried to read Christian scripture. It's a bathroom reading. I had a friend who basically used to collect Bibles from missionaries, take away their materials from them. Yeah, sure, I'll take them. So it's not to let them get into the hands of Jews. And he had a collection in his toilet, basically a pile, a stack, like right next to it, of all these things.
I used to see the New
Yeah.
Testaments in hotel rooms in America.
Yes, that's what they do. The Gideons do that. So
And,
look, it's not your hotel room. You're renting it. What are you going to do? That it's stuck. Just keep it in the box there. I don't know. Put it in the bathroom while you're there, next to the
Yeah.
toilet.
When I was a kid, I maybe looked at it for a second and then felt immediate disgust.
Okay, well, you should, but there's you don't have to. You have no obligation to destroy it. Let's say it's not your fault. It's not yours. You rented the room al Tanai that you leave the Bible there, but yeah, it's pretty bad. How can you rent the room and keep such a thing in there? Well, what are you going to do? Like I said, there's no straight prohibition to read these things. But then again, the sages said even secular Jewish books, or it's Sfarim Chitzona, the book of the Maccabees, Tobit, Chanukh, Chazal didn't say you should even read those. Then those are Jewish books. Yeah, those are heretical books. Chal v'chomer, you shouldn't be reading. What?
It depends on the book.
It depends on the book, basically, how bad it is. You should know better. You shouldn't be sitting and reading these things, but it's not so bad. I wanted to say that. So you saw all these places in New York that had been converted to churches, Rahman al-Islam. But then I went up to Westchester, and there's a large Young Israel in Westchester, like many other shuls in some places. It used to be a church. I think it's the Young Israel of New Rochelle, and there's still some crucifixes as part of the motifs in the windows and places. Yeah, it's meant to look like that. It's not like right up in front and center there's a crucifix, but you can see that it's obvious that the place used to be a church. So, but it's been mevatel. Okay, so okay, they're waiting for me, but whatever. This is more fun. So, and Asher was Batla. Ein mevin mimena gezarim lamaracha. Technically speaking, the Gentile worships this tree, and then he's mevatel it. Good, thank God. But it still should not be used now for wood for the altar. Okay, you can't chop down the tree and use it for the altar. It's technically, you could use the wood. And Asher tree, you generally can't use the wood. But now it's been bottled, so you can. Person's bowing down to an animal. Been prohibited now. It's been disqualified for sacrifice. They shouldn't use its wool for the priestly vestments. Most of the priestly vestments are not made out of wool. If you're Kohen Gadol, yeah, he has a wool me'il, and a wool, the avnate has wool in it. And the regular Kohen, his avnate also is made a little bit out of wool. Well, it's 3/4 wool, 1/4 linen. Right? 3 types of wool and wool linen. So it's basically 3/4 wool. I don't know if by mass, I'm just meant by thread count. The karnel psulim l'chatzotzerot. They shouldn't turn its horns into horns for the temple. Okay, wait, chatzotzerot. We said that some chatzotzerot in the temple actually have to be out of precious metal, right?
Yeah.
But in this case, it means the types of instrumental chatzotzerot that the Levim would play. With shokel, no, not Levim, regular Israelites. Levim sing. Regular Israelites play the instruments. With shokel lachalilin, they can't use its femur bones, the thigh bones, to make flutes. Those are large bones of the animal they use to make these instruments. Uvnei me'el l'nimin. They can't use the intestines to make stringed instruments. Nowadays, the strings they use for string instruments are made out of metals and other compounds, fibers and stuff. But they're not using intestines. Or maybe, I don't know, Stradivarius is
That's definitely
what? What's cat? Oh, it's made from cat guts. Yeah, I was gonna say real classical violins, the Stradivarius violins. How old are they? Whatever. Those are quite ancient. They're considered like the best, the highest quality violins even today. So I guess he was still using me'eha, intestines to make these things. But nowadays they don't use intestines, do they? I hope not. Kol pasel. It's all forbidden. Kol sheish bo shem avodah zara. Anything that has avodah zara on it, basically, it's associated with avodah zara. Lo ye'aseh limleches hakodesh. It should not be used for limleches hakodesh. This expression from the Torah. In Bamidbar, for example, that means anything having to do with the temple. Even though it's technically mutter, And a Jew can own these things, not Isser Hana anymore. He can sell it also. Afal Bishu Mutter Ba'ana. Okay, it's Isser Hana means this thing is that's bad enough for a Jew. But if a Jew can get benefit from such a thing, he could sell it, etc., and even eat it if it was kosher food. But this should not be used for the temple. Temple has higher standards. Oh, let's get into this one. Ezehu Ethnan, the definition of what a prostitute and prostitution is. Let's see what the Rambam says. And Ethnan, the shorish is what? Nun Tov Nun. Okay, and normally in many Hebrew forms, the first nun of the shoresh just drops away, and you wouldn't even know it's there. Okay, so the shoresh nun tov nun is suffers a lot in Hebrew. In the word latet, which means to give, you see neither the first nun and the last nun. The only letter that's left of the shoresh in that entire word is the single tov. Like I say, tufine. Okay, baked goods. It's from the word shoresh aleph pei hey. What do you see of the shoresh of that word? Just the pay. Okay, the middle pay, because the aleph and the hey are weak consonants, so they fall off. What?
Interesting that there's no hint of the drop nun.
There's no hint of the drop nun, but then again, latate, there's no hint of the drop nuns. Both nuns are gone. Okay, lada'at, the yud is missing entirely. There's no, you don't have that. Or lashevet, the yud also gone. No dagesh to make up for it. No hint, like you say. Ha'omer lezona, hey lach devar ze bischarich or bischarich. You have bischarich or bischarich or bischarayich. Rich with a chirik. Okay. In biblical would be bischarich. In more Mishnaic and Aramaic and of course Arabic, it's more a chirik sound. Okay. In Arabic, the female possessives ik. Okay. Shu ismik means what is your name? Let's say ask a woman, what's her name? You don't say ismik or ismich or ismayich. Okay, ismik. Echad zona goya. Whether the zona, this is a halachic term by the way, might not mean literally prostitute. Whether she's a goya or a shifcha, means a slave to a Jew, born Gentile. O Yisraelit shehi erva alav, or a Jewish woman who is prohibited to him. That's what makes her a zona. O mechayve lavin, or just one of the prohibitions of forbidden relations that's not Isser Kares or an Isser Skila, but just an Isser what? Isser Malkus, Chayve lavin. Aval Pnuya, let's say she's single, and technically speaking, he could marry her if he wanted to. Okay, eligible woman, except that now they're doing the thing that's illicit, just paying her for this one time. Afilu haya kohen, even if he's a kohen, et nana mutar. What he's paying her is mutar. Why? Because she's a pnuyan, she's technically not a zona. V'chein ishto nida et nana mutar afu pisha yerva, or he pays his own wife for relations when she's menstruant. That's not et nana mutar mipnei he erva. Afu pisha he erva, because she's not a forbidden relation to him. Okay, so we're going to read the notes here. Okay. Nasa achad mechayve lavin. Let's say he marries one of the forbidden relations, the minimally prohibited relations, the chi of malchus. Kol sheitein la mechamat bila. Okay, whatever he gives her, in as an offer, a fair trade for what he's getting for this act. Hareza etnan v'asur. So that's an etnan, and it's asur. Chayve lavin. Okay, he married her, and every time, like they're officially married, even though they shouldn't be married because they're prohibited to each other. Every time. Pays a male prostitute. Okay, that's forbidden. What about this one? It says here. Hold on. I want to read this in my own book. Nathana ha'isha et nan laboel. A woman pays a male prostitute. Okay. But that's not an etnan. Okay. There has to be a forbidden act here on the part of the woman. So let's what does it say here? Dasa Tosfos and Tamuro says here, Etnan Isha Yisraelit, who etnan sheitan lisha shnivla ba'avar le'achar me'achad. It should be le'achad me'asrim la b'isur karet o mitha. Nechshevet kizona lakuna. Tosfos say that the standard is a woman who has achieved the halachic status of a zonah. A zonah is a woman who engages in relations with a man who's prohibited to her, turns her into a zonah. Why does it matter if a woman had a history? Once in her life, she engages in relations with a close relative, let's say. Okay? So she's now a halachli zonah. What does that mean? She cannot marry Kohen in the future. That's what the definition is. It doesn't mean that she engaged in prostitution. Okay? Even though sometimes zonah and in modern Hebrew means a prostitute, in the Torah you have a few words for this. As a matter of fact, in the Torah, what you and I use in English for prostitution is more often a kedesha. But kedesha is also involved with, why is it used that shorish kuf dalachin? It was involved with Canaanite worship. Yes. But technically speaking, what Yehuda was looking for was a kedesha. He thought that was prostitute k'mashma'a. Whereas zonah is often not what you and I consider prostitute. It's this halachic category of a woman who had this relation. Nafkamina, a woman who was, Rahman Islam, raped by a relative. She's not going to go along with it at all. So the fact that so years later she wants to marry a nice guy. Any Jew can marry her except for Kohen. Why? Because she's technically a zonah, or a woman who converts to Judaism. She's 100%. She's never been with a man. She's 20 years old, never been with a man. Of course, didn't engage in prostitution. But because she was born a Gentile and converts to Judaism, she's considered halachically a zonah, despite having no history. Okay, so that's a technical term. So the Tosfos says it's a technical term here. Okay, so it means that if she gets an ethnon, even from a man now, to whom she could technically get married, because she's already a zonah, the halachic technical definition. So whatever she receives for this act, for a man to submit to this man, so that's considered an ethnon. The Rambam maskim lazeh. The Aruch HaShulchan says that. Whereas ethnani tan l'fnuyah mafkirat asma l'kol. There are those who say the traditional definition. The ethnon means what a person pays to hire what is traditionally in most languages considered a prostitute, a woman who does these things for money, or even just one time. She says, you know what, this time I need to make some money for whatever she's talked into it. A lot of people can be persuaded and manipulated into certain things. There are those who say that, by the way. Okay, so you read here when the Rambam says "aha pnuya etnana mutar," a man gave a pnuya, which technically there's no forbidden relation here. Just that instead of marrying her, just says, "I'll give you $100 for one time." So the Rambam says it's not an etnan. Why do you say that? So you say that this is not etnan. She's not even if she's a nida, it's mutar. Okay, that's prohibited. The time says no telach mir bet na pnuya nida. This implication over here that the Rambam says, okay, it seems that the Rambam is going with which definition? The non-traditional definition, the technical definition of what's a zonah. Because you give a woman this thing, she's doing it. She's a pnuya. Maybe even if she does this regularly, it's not like that. So you see here, I'll read you what I wrote to myself. The translation would not be prostitute. What's called mufkarat l'kol, even she is halachically a zonah. Okay. So this is a very important thing. When they want to be very specific, let's say in Rishonim, when they want to refer to a traditional prostitute, they don't use the word zonah or kedesha. They use the word mizumenet umufkaret lakol, woman who's available and free for all. Okay, she's there. She makes herself available for everybody. Okay, that's the like you'll find when you learn like Shulchan Aruch and Nosei Kalim. That's the term they use. That's unambiguous, referring to what in English is a prostitute. And by the way, also unfortunately in modern Hebrew, one of the biggest shocks I got coming to Israel was that unfortunately for certain averas, there's a whole vocabulary here. And thank God there's certain things I don't live in Tel Aviv, and I don't read their newspapers, so I don't know this. But I did open up one time a regular newspaper, and you know what it has in the back section? The Rechilus section. Now, what's Rechilus? Tailbearing, gossip mongering, or Rechil, tailbearer, gossip monger. Okay, so you learn that Rechilus is what? An Avera. Since fourth grade, they gave us copies of the Chafetz Chaim or similar books, guard your tongue, whatever it is. And you're learning, Rechilus is an Avera. It's the name of an Avera. It's like Shvichus Damim. Okay, and it's like they say, Rechilus is like Shvichus Dam in certain respects. Lashon Hara, it's bad. Even though unfortunately, everybody gets tripped up with Lashon Hara. That's the Avera. But it's something not good. American newspapers have the gossip section, the gossip page. So I say gossip in Hebrew, rechilas. So the newspapers which copy, the ways of the Gentiles, so they have a rechilas section. And I always think, oh my goodness, they have a znus section. Ad kedei kach, a good Jewish newspaper does not have what? We said this before, a sports section, a movie section, all the extra sections that the New York Times and all those other rags, as they call them. Thank God we don't have newspapers anymore. So you go downstairs on Thursday, they put the free copy of the Settler newspaper. You can also get here free copies of TED. I don't agree with the newspaper saying I use them, as you saw in my house. I use them to clean up messes on the floor. I don't read the newspapers. You see what I was doing in the house? Clean up oil, like frying pan, take away the extra oil. My kids know. I'll get my daughter a newspaper. She wants to read like the funny section from those Jewish comedians, underdose people. So she reads that. I get her a newspaper. But the actual newspaper I use is to clean up around the house. And I use it for cleanup. Thank God I learned that from yeshiva. So you could use these things, and at least in praise of the newspapers, the Jewish newspapers, they don't have sports sections or Narishkeit sections. Okay, thank God. But the seculars really need to understand this. People care about soccer. Who cares about soccer? We talked about this last month. Man tells his friend, "Here, take this. Vitalin shivchascha etzel avdi ivri hariza esnon." He says, "I'll pay you. I'm doing my Eved Ivri a favor. Eved Ivri is a Jew, sold into slavery because of his debts. So he's not allowed to have relations with the shivcha kainis. Okay, very specific term. She was born Gentile, acquired by Jews, or any woman born to such a woman. That's a shivcha kainis, and she stays a shivcha kainis until she's emancipated, if she ever is emancipated. So a Jew is not to have relations with her, okay, except if it's an Eved Ivri who already has a wife, in which case he is compelled to impregnate her by his master to provide more slave children. So Reged Eved Ivri, this is an act of illicit relations for him. So this is considered an esnot, even though the Eved Ivri is not paying for it, his master is. V'hu shelo yelo isha b'vanim. But as long as this is the case of Eved Ivri has no wife and children. Why? Because if he had a wife and children, as we saw in Hilchos Yisur Bia, so then it's mutter. He is married with children. As we'll see in later halachic sections that in such a case the Eved Ivri is compelled. Why would a master do this with a shivcha kainis? If there are other avodim around, so the man wants more slave children. The shivcha is not. She's useful. She does the laundry and cooks and stuff, but maybe he wants more slave children. Wants the next generation of slaves. So if there's an Eved Kanani around, so have him, impregnate her. That'd work fine. But if they're not so common, Avodim aren't such a common thing. So where's he going to get someone to impregnate a slave? Any other Jew can't do it because that's a forbidden for that's Navera. So we'll find an Eved Ivri. So an Eved Ivri is compared. Ki mishnes sachar sachir avodecha sheishanim. The Eved Ivri has to work overtime. He works during the day. Whatever profession he had, he now works for the master. If he was a shoemaker, so he becomes a shoemaker, but he works on behalf of his master, right? But he's also compelled to live with this woman to the extent that he can impregnate her and make slave children who are not considered his own children for the master. Okay, so that's not considered esnon if this Eved Ivri is permitted to the shivcha. If it's he's not permitted to the shivcha because of his own status, so it would be an esnon. The same thing applies to if a person tells a zonah. Once again, what do we mean? Traditional prostitute or halachic technical thing? But he tells her, "Here, take this, and go submit to this Jew over there." Okay, because it doesn't matter who's paying the prostitute, the lack of a better word, the prostitute for her services, as long as someone's paying her. Okay, third party is paying, it's still considered an ethnon. Dear God, thank God these things aren't around. I don't know. I heard years ago that one guy said he was going to do this. I don't know why he told me. Thank God, it's the only time I know of such a thing happening. Too much of a tummy. But it was just like, ugh. We have to protect. Thank God society puts up barriers. You live in a nice Jewish from neighborhood, saying you don't have to be a Haredi, but there's many benefits spiritual benefits, just protection of living in the more Haredi neighborhood you live in, the less likely you are to ever see such a thing. Okay, you don't see this in Mea Shearim. Okay, it doesn't exist. And you go the opposite, and you do see this, so you have to watch out. Man, what was the terms of the transaction was he'll give her one lamb. And he ended up giving her many lambs. He was very, I guess, he was enthusiastic about paying her. Okay. Even if he gave her 1,000 lambs, 1,000 times as much as he had contracted to give her. Kulan ethnan vasrilam is bech. So they're all considered the hire of a harlot. So they're all forbidden for the altar. Natanla etnana, he gives her payment, did the deed. Ella amarla yehi, and then he says, just keep what I gave you. Ad shavu elayich, okay, until I come back again. It becomes forbidden because he only made the contract after the first act, so it's like the first act was a freebie for him. Okay, I think that's the pirush there. Let me just make sure. They spell it without a yud. No, it's somewhere. One second here. Nikud problem here, by the way. We're gonna come here and try to make a note for myself. Okay, no, let's go on here. We're gonna see the. Okay, no. So yeah, that's the thing. Okay. Next. Kadmavik rivatu kodem shivolea kasher. So this animal, it's there. He's basically given her the animal on condition for a future act. Okay, prepaid. I don't know who prepays his prostitutes. I don't. It sounds really weird, but and then she brought it to the temple anyways and brought it as a sacrifice, this lamb. So it's kosher. Because even though it was given to her for what she's going to do, it's what she was going to do. She hasn't done it yet. And on condition that he said when he gave it to her, once you're ready to, do this with me, then you acquire it. Okay, it's like when she affects the transaction once she's ready. If he didn't give her the stipulation, remember what makes it hers? The fact that she determined to engage in relations with this man. A person cannot offer for korban something that's not his own property. Okay, so she has to at least have decided, okay, we're now going to go through with this, but they still didn't go through with it, otherwise it would become completely prohibited. So it's an in-between stage. Interesting. Now, what do you have here? I have Teratzi. It says Teratzi Li in Makbili. In Machon Mamre. In Korean, it's Lo. You have Li also. So why Teratzi Li? Because talking about a man who contracted the property. Teratzi Lo. What's the Lo over here? Is it
it's not a.
Yeah.
I guess it's an indirect quotation.
What?
I guess it would be an indirect quotation.
Or he's using it as he's talking about himself in the third person. Okay. I don't know why I do that. Okay. And they point out that the Rambam says over here you have the word ematai, right? You have it with the tzerei. Is it spelled with a yud? Now Machon Mamre spells his word with an aleph, with a yud. A, and then matai is spelled with after the tuf, there's two yuds. So you're pretty clear that Machon Mamre reads this as a matai with the tzerei, right? Except that they point out that the Rambam Fershim Mishnayos, they say the Rambam is menaked this word as ammathai with a patach because there's no yud in the Perishim Mishnayos. Now I didn't see nikud in the Perishim Mishnayos. I checked the Perishim Mishnayos that I have the Kapach edition, and it's spelled aleph mem taf yud. There's no yud, but I don't see where they got the nikud there. So I wrote myself. He spells it without yud. But even Makbili used traditional nikud. Makbili has it no yud, but still spells it with the tzerei. So I don't see why Korean assumes that Rambam would not vocalize it with the tzerei, even if the Rambam doesn't have the yud written there. Okay, so Tzarech on why they did this. Yeah. Okay, next one. Kadima viktishato kodem shevo. She got up and she took this animal. It's already hers. because he paid her with it, and says, when you're ready, once you determine that we're going to accept what I am offering, it'll be your animal. But they still haven't done the deed. And then he came, then they did. But she already dedicated to the temple. So it's sitting there in the base of Mikdash, let's say, waiting to be brought. Hareza safekim hu ethnan. So now you have a safek esnan. Ho'il v'aleh kodem she'takrivenu. Because he came upon her before she offered it as sacrifice. Oh, no esnan. Maybe it's not esnan. Sharek dishatu kodem bia, because she dedicated to the temple before the actual act. Lefichach lo yakrav. Therefore, you have yakrav or yakriv. Yakrav. I have yakrav here in Mechon Mamar. You have yakrav, and Korain has it as yakriv. Okay, same thing. Yakrav means he shouldn't bring it, or in this case, lo yakrav, it should not be brought. It's like a yikarev. V'im karev or karav. You have karev? Karav. Okay, and if he did bring it, but who's the he? Okay, nirtzah. If it was brought, so it means if it was brought as a korban. Okay, if it was brought, so it's acceptable. It's a suffix esnan. You shouldn't bring it as a korban, but if it did, it did. Okay, makes sense. And I think that's a good place to stop for now. Sorry for the slight lateness. And let's check if we have any questions or comments. I'll stop this here. Nothing there coming in here. We had one question about kashrus come in, and that's it for tonight then. So we'll see you next time. And God willing, like I said, we should have clarity in all these questions, see what the Sanhedrin decides, so that we know how to bring proper korbanot, God willing, with the rebuilding of the temple. Shabbat Shalom.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.